This is George Dionne of the Rock is George podcast, and this is a KNAC.com exclusive interview with vocalist JOHN KEVILL of the heavy metal act Warbringer. If I knew absolutely nothing about Warbringer, how would you describe the band's music to me?
Vicious.
I like it.
Vicious and lethal. That's what I'll say. Vicious and lethal. Yeah.
An old guy like me might call it thrash metal.
That's right.
On March 14th, you guys are going to be releasing your latest studio album, Wrath and Ruin, through Napalm Records. Is there a particular meaning behind the album's title? Because I noticed there wasn't a song with that name.
It does appear in track 6, the title line. There is a title line in there on Strike from the Sky. That's there. But basically, the album's title came about after we had written most of the thing. And we have a thing where we use the letter W for all our album titles, which one will notice if you look at our discography. And the fourth one, before someone asks, it's technically Warbringer 4. So therefore, it gets in on a technicality. Because it's just called War Empire Squads anyway. So yeah, they're all W's, and at this point, we're not going to break our own thing that we decided to do for some reason. And so I'm looking at so we have this record, and some of the themes on the record are class power and sort of the techno dystopia that we have today, or that we're going into, whatever stage of that we're in. And sort of the spiritual malaise of modernity. That's kind of the stuff I'm trying to stab at on here. And I was looking for W words after we had most of this record written, and the one Wrath popped up. And actually, Theoden, King of Rohan's speech to the riders of Rohan at the Battle of Plow Fields in Return of the King went to my head, which is now for wrath, now for ruin, and a red nightfall. And that just popped in my head. So I shortened that to Wrath and Ruin. And with the album title cover, and there's sort of the shining city in the clouds and the ruins and slum beneath, it's sort of like those atop the ivory tower rain down the wrath and ruin upon everyone below them. The lords shit on the peasants, basically. And that's kind of what the theme of the record is. So that's how I take it. It doesn't actually have to do with what Theoden was doing, because I salute the Riders of Rohan, but that's a different thing. It's not about that. I just yoinked it because it's a really cool, memorable phrase, and it applies in the context we have it in, I think.
Your latest single, I believe, addresses class warfare. That's the sword and the cross. If you want to tell me a little bit about that lyrically.
So basically, I had a medieval history professor once who put an interesting nugget in my head, which is like, what is a castle for? And we're talking like the early Middle Ages, when, the chivalric feudal order isn't fully established yet. We're still sort of fumbling around after the fall of Rome. And she says, you might think of it as defensive, but really the castle on the hilltop is sort of offensive area control. Me and my knights can ride out and do whatever we want. And how many, are you willing to besiege a castle to do something about it? If you don't have that level of force, then you got to basically accept the law of the sword that we can lay down on you. So it's a way to sort of subjugate and control the lands around it in that early period where, you want to ask the question, how did the lords even become the lords, right? Because if you ask them, they'll say they always were. And always will be, it seems. So I wrote that because I think in our society, if you look at some of the social and economic theory guys around here, there's a guy, Yanis Varoufakis, who uses this term techno-feudalism. And that stuck in my head. I was like, oh, indeed. And we have this kind of mythos of being a free society, but there are very hard limits to that we bump into. I personally don't think there's ever been a free country, and I think people just like to pretend because it makes them feel better. Sorry if that's not very optimistic, but basically I think we more or less have de facto lords and peasants. I would be one of the latter, I think. And that the gap between them might be higher than it was in the Middle Ages. How many of you or me does it take to make one Bezos or Musk? A city full, a few million of us, right? So we're going to pretend that this is an equal society? Horse shit, No, we have lords and peasants, and if we just called it as it is, we would have a clearer picture at least. I don't know if that would mean we can do anything about it. But so I'm basically doing that and saying that we have this mythos of a free society that we like to believe, and just like the cross was, there's someone somewhere going, "You ignorant fools! You actually believe that? That's why I'm going to own you forever." And that's kind of what the vibe of the song is supposed to be.
Well, kind of in keeping with this dystopia, your other single that's out now, "A Better World," is ironically titled because in that song you're pretty much professing you don't see that beautiful world unless, of course, we mask it with medication and vices.
Right, all right. There's this interesting book out there you can find by a guy who actually offed himself too. So it tells you how uplifting this book is. But I was reading this during COVID. It's called Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher, and it's basically saying that post Cold War, there was this thing at the end of the Cold War called the end of history, this sort of academic thesis. It's this idea that every single society, we've kind of found the final form of human civilization in what you might call the Western model, right? And 20, 30 years out from, actually, we're almost, we're 30 years out or so from that period. And at this point, it looks like what was once sort of a hooray, we won kind of thing with the end of history is sort of triumphalist, now looks a bit bleaker because more or less there's these great systemic problems with the world that more or less the answer is that we're not going to solve them. No one thinks that we're going to fix the climate, right? You either have to stick your head in the sand and pretend that's not the biggest problem that's ever faced the human species, or you have to kind of just look the other way and be like, when you read on this, so scientists predict, you have to just not read it because you're like, I know it's bad. So and so thing goes extinct, And I used to be kind of idealistic about this. I was in the Boy Scouts. I was like, I'm going to pick up some litter, and that's my good turn for the day. And we're going to make a difference. We're going to recycle. It's like, oh, as it turns out, the recycling they just send to a third world country to store the trash because it's actually too expensive to recycle it. To wash the plastic bottle is not worth the cost economically of the water it takes to wash it, so on and so forth. Sorry, kids, saving the planet's not doesn't make economic sense, so we're not going to do it. But by the way, still go to school, study hard, and try to have a family. And that's kind of so that has profound implications. What all this sounds like big picture stuff, but has profound implications on the individual. And I guess I was feeling that, and when I was writing that song, I was trying to bottle all this into a song, into a little snappy phrase. So a better world's not possible. If you pretty much think that we're in the best system and the best society possible, well, then the future looks like a slightly worse present. And maybe a much worse present, but the best you can hope for is a worse present, and that's grim. That's really fucking grim. And I wanted to kind of like put that in a sardonic, sarcastic kind of way. Took me a second to sell the band on that song title because it doesn't sound cool on the sticker, but I think once you hear the song, it kind of clicks.
Do you have a third single planned by the album's release?
We sure do. The video is already shot and ready to go. It should be out in a week or two, and it's called Through a Glass Darkly. It's sort of the epic on the record.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if you've heard the record or not. I could talk about that one if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so Through a Glass Darkly, interestingly, doesn't have as much to do. The first two songs are very much underlying with the bigger theme of the record, but I don't write a concept record per se. I'm trying to write a collection of interesting songs that has maybe a few threads running through it, but in general, the themes of the band are like power, conflict, and the human civilizational struggle, both from the big picture and the small picture. That's kind of where my MO has been for a couple of records now. So this one, there's actually there's a U.S. World War II general called George S. Patton, probably the best tank commander the U.S. had in that war. And Patton was an interesting character. It's a great film if you're into your old dad stuff war movies, which I am. And there's a scene in that film where he goes and he talks about reincarnation. He goes there in North Africa fighting Rommel and stuff, and he's like, turn the jeep to the side. He talks like that the whole movie, and he goes and sees this field, and he describes where the Roman deployment was and where the Carthaginian deployment was. He's at what I believe is the Battle of Zama, which is where the fall of Carthage in the Second Punic War and stuff, pretty ancient epic stuff. And he says, I remember because I was there 2,000 years ago. I was there. And I'm like, that's heavy. That's cool as hell. So it turns out the guy wrote a poem. The real George S. Patton wrote a poem about this belief of his he has, and he called it Through a Glass Darkly. So I'm trying to write the song of that poem very directly. There's some direct quotations in there, and there's some very close paraphrasing because there's some great lines in that. But Patton apparently believed that he had hunted a mammoth in the Ice Age, that he had marched with Caesar. He rode with Napoleon in the cavalry under Marat. He specifies which marshal he rode under even. And that he will rise again and again and again. George S. Patton would be just one of the faces of this warrior of 1,000 faces that he imagined himself to be. And I'm like, that's really cool. As a guy who's I don't really believe in reincarnation or any of that. I'm very like non-religious, but the idea has a lot of power and emotional weight to me. And I think it has something very Sisyphean, like Sisyphus, the guy who pushes the boulder up the hill eternally in the underworld. This sort of eternal human struggle and a metaphor for life's conflict of being an eternally reincarnating warrior who surely must wonder what he's doing around the 1,000th time. Why? Why must I be reborn to suffer over and over again? My favorite line in the poem, which I actually did get into the song, is there's a line where Patton imagines himself having been Longinus, who was the Roman legionary that stabbed Jesus in the side with the spear on Golgotha. That Longinus, who's apparently a saint, I learned. I didn't know that. How that guy gets to be a saint. Interesting. He stabbed Jesus, like, come on. But anyway, so in the poem, Patton writes that I have stabbed the Savior in his sacred helpless side, yet I've called his name out countless times as I've died. And I'm like, that's a fucking bar right there. That is a good line. So I got that almost verbatim in the song. I didn't have the sacred helpless part, but because I didn't fit the syllables. But yeah, I was like, that's heavy, man. That's just I don't know what it is too, because I'm very like secular, but some of that religiosity kind of imagery in metal gets me, which is interesting. But yeah, so that's what Through, and I'd say musically Through a Glass Darkly kind of has like a fist raising thing, has a very epic feel, and it's kind of a pocket epic. It's a short run length. And I kind of sound all anguished, like I'm dragging a stone on the vocals, I'd say.
So, in your non-music life, are you like a history professor, or is this just something that you studied growing up? Not too many musicians have referenced Sisyphus to me in the past.
Oh, sure. I think the more you know, that like all stuff that you can know is a source. It's a gold mine for music. So whatever your niche interest is, go for it. I do have a history degree, sadly, and I do teach. I'm like a tutor for hire right now. I'm going on tour, so I couldn't be a proper teacher this year. I've torpedoed any chance I have at a decent career by insisting on playing this thrash metal nonsense. So I'm a tutor for hire. I'll help your kid do their math homework or whatever. I never get to teach history, even though that's what I study. I teach everything but, which is annoying. So I get, but yes, I am really interested in that, and it fits. The band's got war in the name, and I think that where it's kind of gone and where I've taken it, because I could tell you way too much about various conflicts that I'm not sure why I bother to know this sometimes, but it's like I end up being some kind of pacifist as a result of everything I've learned about human conflict. I think that's where one ends up if you're not really cold-hearted, I suppose. But I tried to write about like power and conflict and just like the suffering humankind inflicts upon itself and the grand destiny of civilization. And thinking about these subjects gets me thinking all that. And to me, that's a pretty cool theme for metal.
Absolutely.
Also, just on the subject of human conflict and the effort spent on it. So for the Germans to do the Schlieffen Plan in 1914 as the First World War, they mobilized 7 armies on this meticulous timetable where from, in 42 days after the conflict's declared, they're supposed to be in Paris and have ended it. They have a few million men doing this. This is a massive scale national effort. Never once in history did any Kaiser ever mobilize 7 armies to go like build houses for the poor in the slums. Never once. That tells you something about people. I guess if we get the asteroid or the nukes, we'll deserve it.
So included with the latest album is a second disc of live material, performances from Hungary, Poland, and France. Tell me a little bit about these shows and why you wanted to include them with the new album.
Well, basically we were on a tour called Ravaging Europe 2023, I believe, and it was with Evil Invaders, Schizophrenia, and Mason from Australia, and it was a hell of a tour. We were out for like 5.5 weeks. Many shows, like 40 something shows, I think. And our sound guy, Bob, recorded all of it. So we had all this live material. And, there'd been people talking about wanting to hear a live thing. We have got a good reputation as a live band, well-deserved from all the players in our group. We headbang the whole fucking set every night, as one should. And basically we had this opportunity to just put it out, so we did. That's basically it. We want some bonus material on the record. If you get the double disc version that has that, you get to hear a bunch of Warbringer live stuff, and it's kind of drawn from a few different shows, few different recordings, but it's all the same tour, and I think it's a good representation of the energy and the sheer attack that this band has in the live setting.
Now, the album was produced by Mark Lewis, who worked with Cannibal Corpse and Trivium in the past. What did he bring to the table when crafting this album with you?
Well, I think the best way to say what he brings to the table is listen to it and listen how big the freaking thing sounds. That's what Mark Lewis brought to the table. He is so first, we did a couple things on this record that were aimed to make it sonically stand out from the previous two. So we tuned the guitars down a half step from E flat to D standard, which is where we are in this one. And then we changed producers and worked with Mark Lewis. And together, what this was supposed to achieve is to get a more extreme and dark sound, I suppose, than what we had on the last one, but also just to change some of the sonic attributes of this record so that it would immediately stand out from our discography. And I think on both counts, that basically happened. Mark Lewis as a producer, so as a guy, Mark Lewis has one of the best dumb senses of humor ever, and that makes him a very easy guy for me to work with and laugh with and stuff, because we could just be absolutely idiotic, telling the stupidest joke and spoonerisming things that shouldn't be constantly. So it was really funny because we had this really professional setting. We're working at a pretty high level, I think, doing really good work in the studio, all the players. And then we're just acting like absolute mongoloids, and it was great. So I enjoy Mark Lewis, the dude, for that reason. And we were actually staying, his studio's at his house too. So we were like in an apartment behind him. So we're right there. His family's around him. It was really cool. We basically lived with Mark for a month, just about. I got to know the guy pretty well. Production wise, I'd say something he did that was really cool is a lot of the sounds on there, they sound really big and pro and stuff, and they are pretty much the organic tones we had. He was utterly ruthlessly meticulous in drum tones and guitar amp tones. We had, I think, 7 or 8 different stacks of amps down there, and we tested every guitar we had, not through every amp and every configuration, through every speaker of every amp with every guitar. It was about 2 days of just that, and I, as the singer, was bored to tears, but I can't argue with the results.
So you mentioned the album artwork earlier in reference to the album's title. Very thrash metal in its vein. It's like kind of the old school art versus kind of the digital art. Who was this, your design, or did you just kind of present the idea to the artist and he ran with it?
More the second. The concept was for me. I wrote up like a little page about here's some of the concepts we want, that techno feudalism stuff, the idea of like a two-tiered society, because you can see there's this like shining city in the clouds and then sort of the ruins and waste and slums below it, and that has to do with that kind of a good visual way to show the sort of class power themes. I sent him a bunch of pictures from like like cyberpunk cities. I sent him some pictures of like urban decay in Los Angeles and shit, some parts of which look horrific these days. And then you got, and then also like a hive city from Warhammer 40K, which if you're not familiar, it's called a hive city, tells you what you need to, it's for people, tells you what you need to know about it. But it's this like future castle looking thing where it's just a sprawling industrial wasteland with like billions of people in it. It's just horrible to live in. So that was kind of like sci-fi dystopian cityscapes was definitely part of the stuff I threw at Andreas. And Andreas Marshall is an old school metal artist. He did the first cover I'm aware of him doing, which just the first one I'm aware of, because I don't know his whole career or anything. I just know some of his work. But Sodom, Agent Orange, he did that one. He did Blind Guardian, Nightfall, and Middle Earth. Those are the record I really like that he did. And so it's cool because that's well before my time too. And just so he is an old school metal artist, and it does have that feel. And we want that because we are trying to not only pay homage to the greatness of old metal, but also to continue it. We think this is how it's done. This is how it should be done. And moving past the full album length. I love when you get a metal album and the cover and everything makes it look like it's some monument that stands there in time, like you got Rust in Peace on your wall right there, like that, that feeling of this is a turtle, this will be there forever, these riffs are immortal and stuff. That feeling, I get that from a bunch of old metal, even the famous stuff and even some of the obscure stuff. I'm like, other people just don't know how immortal and great this is. I feel that about a lot of stuff. And so that's kind of what we're aiming for, is that, I don't know how to even put it, but you get from just old classic metal. Every song's a banger. It's all killer, no filler. The band is on all cylinders the whole time. And, you can feel the headbanging and just the energy throughout the whole record. And so that's what we're trying to do, is channel that in the 2020s and beyond as best as we can. And so having the ethos look that way too helps. Do
you think that your last album, Weapons of Tomorrow, which came out in 2020, got a fair shake because, the environment of the world around us at the time?
I think, well, Weapons was probably the most praised record we had. It was really frustrating to see all the great, that run got rave reviews from pretty much everybody from what I saw. And we weren't able to capitalize on it because we were stuck at home. That's part of why there's a 5-year gap here, because that sort of made the band distant and alienated from itself in a way, if that makes any sense. And made it hard to get back to. And some of the stuff, the really bitter, like Better World or Cage of Air, a couple songs on this record, come from that period of having just put out Weapons of Tomorrow and being effectively grounded and not knowing what I'm supposed to be doing in life and feeling very like trapped and, and paying almost everything I make to my fucking landlord in LA, who raised the rent on us this is something my landlord did during COVID. There's a 30-day period which you have to inform the tenant of a rent increase, and the government has a maximum percentage you're allowed to increase it by. So they raised it arbitrarily without a reason given by the maximum legal amount to the cent, and they had 30 days to give us the notice. They gave it to us on midnight, so like not a second before the 30 days that was legally required them. So what that tells me is if we were legally allowed, we would fuck you over harder. you know. Um, so anyway, that's some of the stuff we were dealing with there, which for my landlord is smart, by the way. It's not even because he's a dick or whatever. It's because that's intelligent in our system. That's good business. Fuck
Hmm.
me, you know. Right. So I just thought a lot of times things you think are a systemic failure are actually a success, and it's just twisted in the first place. Um, so anyway, I'm dealing with that kind of stuff and feeling kind of hopeless about our future. And I'm like, we're stuck on this eternal wheel. And even when I go and make what might be the best record of my career at the time Weapons of Tomorrow came out, a lot of people felt I might like Vanquish to hair better, but it's up there. Weapons is a great record, and I'm really proud of it. And I'm like, we did it. We made a thrash record that's some people call it a modern classic or whatever. And so what? I'm still stuck at home. I still can barely pay my fucking rent, and every landlord or insurer or even the fucking grocery store is trying and succeeding in extracting the maximum pound of flesh out of me as efficiently as they can, and I'm just feeling very as a result. Now that's still going on, but I think COVID really sort of revealed that. Like that was already there. That didn't magically appear, but I think it got exacerbated by it. So it brought it into focus, I think, for myself and a lot of people. And so I was trying to put some of those feelings on the record because ultimately, if you want to write about something like a battle or a social phenomenon or anything in music, I think the best angle is to write about how it feels, that thing, rather than the thing itself.
Well, you certainly have a lot of touring coming up in 2025. I actually couldn't keep up with all the touring that you're doing. I do know that you have the Vortex of Violence tour here in North America. You're doing a 2-month run with eh, Allegaon, Skeletal Remains,
Mhm.
Summoning the Lick.
Yep.
Sure, I got that first band right, but are these bands
A
that you've played with
legion.
in the past?
I thought it was a legion. It's a legion, is apparently how it's said. But it's a technical death metal band, really sick musicians in that band, good players. So we have kind of like technical death metal, old school, more like classic death metal. I'd say with Skeletal Remains, and then you got us, which is somewhere on the extreme end of the thrash metal genre. So that's
Uh,
a good tour. And then we're doing more death metal in Europe with Cryptopsy and Carnation and Decapitated. And then we got a bunch of festivals and just different shows in Europe, including a few club shows with Creator and Rotting Christ. So summer, we got USA, Europe, 3 full-length tours. And there will probably be more later in the year and maybe going into next year. I think this record cycle is probably going to continue on, probably not nonstop, but we'll still be touring this thing summer 2026 is what we expect. So we're saddling up. We're going to go out there and show the people what we're about.
how many songs do you think you're going to be able to play off the new album?
Probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 is what we can do. We're going to have to tinker around. We usually don't have like a fixed set list. We usually try to have, so say we need to play 12 songs in a night. Try to have like 16 to 18 rehearsed and fiddle around with it as we go. Usually towards like the end of a tour, we'll kind of have something figured out that we mostly stick to. But even then, we'll play around a bit. So I don't know, to be honest, and that's kind of exciting to find out. I haven't played any of this live. Not one song of this record's been played live yet, ever. So we're gonna have to see where they go well in the set and try to just move them around and see. Also, when the record actually comes out, we'll get to see kind of which songs people gravitate towards. We'll be talking to them, so we'll see what they want to hear. They'll tell us, and that'll influence what we end up playing and how much of the record, how it's received, all that. Right now, we're gonna have 3 singles, and we're probably playing at least 2 of those in any given set.
Do you prefer the festival shows to the club shows because it's a little, you're exposed to more of an audience even outside of the genre. Plus, I would assume that there's a lot less setup when you're going to a festival than there is if you're doing a club tour.
You end up with a pretty similar amount of setup. I don't notice a huge difference there, to be honest. You still got to put up the merch and you still got to get your gear in. Even if you're using the festival backline, you got to get situated with that. So that's a roughly equivalent amount of work, I'd say. Um, But so honestly, I have sort of an attitude of it doesn't matter which show I prefer. What's the crowd think? Right? I'm just there to do my job and I'm there to do as well as I can. So my favorite show, my favorite place to play, my favorite setting is the one I'm on tonight. That's my favorite one because it's the only one. There is no other show. So you put me in front of Vakken Open Air, or you put me in front of a Sleazy Pete's Bar and Grill with 9 people there, and I'm gonna blow your head off. I don't care. Because that's the only way. That's what the art demands. That's what the music demands, and that's respect for the fans right there. Um, Business wise, band would prefer to be on festival stages all the time. There's no doubt there. But feel wise, the only thing I don't because festival shows can feel big and mighty in a way, and you kind of have to perform a little different in each. Like some of the stuff that works in a club doesn't work in a festival and vice versa. Usually festival more like big anthemic gestures and stuff. And in a club, it matters more like the direct eye contact and riling up that one guy over there and bantering with the audience and responding to the little things that are going on in the smaller setting. You can do more of that in a club, whereas in a festival, you can't as much because the person 50 rows back has no idea what's going on up there. And you can't like so if you comment on it, it'll fall flat for people who aren't in that locality. So there's a lot of different things, and my character on stage has to change a little bit to do each setting. And they're both fun in different ways, I would say. But again, it's not for me to say which show I like best because the one I'm playing for you tonight is my favorite show, and you'll see that on stage.
I would imagine as a music fan yourself, there must be some enjoyment of being able to rub elbows with your rock heroes at some of these festivals.
Oh, sure. We got that right when we started. So I got most of those butterflies out of my tummy a while ago. But I've met a lot of musicians that I'm very grateful to have met. It's cool that I'm on speaking in friendly terms with people whose records I listened to when I started this band and stuff. And it's been a great opportunity. I've toured with so many bands and played with so many and met a ton of great and talented musicians. And it's funny how, despite there being a million bands in the metal touring world and stuff, that's also kind of a small world, and you run into the same people over and over again. So,
Sure.
oh, my wife likes your shirt, by the way. I said the same thing, honey.
That's
Yeah, the Brewster with the machine gun. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, it's I guess we do have our chickens here, so we're chicken people. Yeah, so absolutely, and I've had some great chances to talk to so like Exodus and Creator, I've had great conversation with like late at night on the buses. I've Hansi Kurdish from Blind Guardian was a real class act and apparently listened to Warbringer 4 in traffic and he said that the angst on the record suited his anger at the traffic well. I got to meet, Dave Mustaine wrote us a greeting card when he joined the tour, and I can only read this in his voice, where it was like, "Hello, War Bunnies, welcome to the tour." It was like that kind of the hello me, the real me voice. When I read it, I imagined that voice saying it, which is hilarious. You can't make that shit up. So on and so forth. All these little things that I don't even remember that I did are great that I just have that in my experience. And yeah, it's absolutely cool to play with. And whether they're bands that I listened to when I started this band or a band I haven't heard that I then get to tour with, there's so many shredders and great players and talented people in music and in metal today. And it's really a privilege to get to rub elbows with all of them and just hang around players of that caliber and bands of that caliber. It's really cool. I can't say that it's a bummer.
Well, you've been doing this Warbringer band for over 20 years now. What would you say is one of the bigger highlights of your time in Warbringer?
My big highlight that if I could go back and tell my like 17-year-old self that I did this was I got to open for Maiden. The Battle of San Bernardino 2013, I believe. We opened for Iron Maiden, which has got to be, if not my favorite band, top 3 for sure. And I'll get all Wayne's World about it. Absolutely, I felt that way about that.
So, over the last 20 years or so, was there a low point you'd like to forget, or maybe it was something you learned from?
It's something I learned. I don't know if there's any point I'd want to forget. The low point has to have been the 2014 period when the fourth record came out and half the band quit, and then I had to tour. I did like 2 tours on that record with half the band missing in a fill-in lineup, and that was rough. And then knowing kind of that we weren't going to continue, and I was going, "What am I doing this for? There's no future in this." But we ended up rebuilding the band from that low point and making our best run of albums, Woe to the Vanquish being the first of those. So I think definitely that coming back to it and having worked to rebuild the whole band from it collapsing at that point gave me a sort of renewed drive and focus. And I think that I pushed myself as a vocalist and lyricist as a result.
So, before I let you go, how did you settle on the band name Warbringer?
I wish I had a cooler story than it is. It's kind of dumb. Basically, so there's a lot of metal bands, and there's not that many cool names left, you know? So we're trying to find one of the ones that isn't explicitly taken by someone worthy and important. And we're going through, actually, Andy Locks, our bass player, John Locks' brother, was looking through a list of monsters from the video game Diablo 2, which has like hundreds of different names for monsters in it. And most of them, since they're all demons, it sounds pretty metal. So there was like a pain bringer or something. And Andy Locks was substituting metal names for other metal names. So he put just Warbringer because war is a metal sounding word. And we were like, that has a ring to it. It makes me think of like some evil chaos knight in spiky armor on a hilltop, like looking down at you menacingly, like he will bring a scourge of warfare and desolation. You know, so it kind of has that vibe to it. And yeah, it's like, well, that's definitely metal. Okay, let's go. It has a ring. Could have done worse, you know. We didn't get to be called Slayer or something. There's no band names that good left anymore, but you know, we're doing the best we can.
Well, as I consumed Warbringer this week, I kept thinking of the Deep Purple song Stormbringer, and I kept thinking, Warbringer's coming, Warbringer's coming.
Hey, that would be a cooler origin story than the one we actually have. I probably should have done that. Deep Purple is a much cooler than Diablo 2, as cool as Diablo 2 is.
Well, those are all the questions I have for you today, John. The new Warbringer album is Wrath and Ruin. It comes out March 14th through Napalm Records. Intense album. I wish you the best of luck with it, and I want to thank you for taking the time today to tell me more about it.
Thank you, George. Thanks for the interview. I hope you and the listeners all enjoy this thing, and we hope to see you out on the road and bang some heads and break some skulls. Let's go.